Hi everyone, I'm Kaylee Rodenbush and I am presenting my final course project where I formed and analyzed two research questions using the data file surrounding heart failure. According to the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, there are about 6.5 million adults in the United States who are diagnosed with heart failure. In 2017, heart failure was a contributing cause in 1 in 8 deaths. It also costs the U.S. an estimated $30.7 billion annually, which includes the cost of healthcare services, medications, and missed days of work. Heart failure also has a high readmission rate, which contributes to the elevated costs. The 30-day readmission rate is about 20%, while the readmission rate at 6 months is about 50%. The data was collected on 200 random adult patients diagnosed with heart failure. There were 12 variables within the data file, including demographic and socioeconomic information. The variables that I used for my research are highlighted here, and I will go into them in more detail shortly. My research questions are as followed. 1. In patients diagnosed with heart failure, is there a difference in the amount of discharge, education, and support received and the number of 30-day readmissions to the hospital? And 2. Is there a difference in the mean scores of the self-efficacy of persons with heart failure by levels of depression, as measured by the Beck Depression Inventory, abbreviated BDI? So for the first question, in patients diagnosed with heart failure, is there a difference in the amount of discharge, education, and support received and the number of 30-day readmissions to the hospital? The independent variable is the amount of discharge, education, and support received. The level of measurement is categorical with 3 levels, including usual care plus a daily phone call, and usual care plus a daily phone call plus a 24-hour online chat. The dependent variable is the number of 30-day readmissions into the hospital, which is also at the categorical level. The 2 hypotheses I've used are stated here. The null hypothesis states that there is no difference in the number of 30-day readmissions to the hospital between the 3 types of discharge, education, and support received. And the non-directional alternative hypothesis states that there is a difference in the number of 30-day readmissions to the hospital between the 3 types of discharge, education, and support received. The inferential test I used was chi-square. Some assumptions of the chi-square include the comparison of 2 categorical variables that are independent of each other. The sample is large, in this case 200, and has more than 10 frequencies per cell. This test compares the proportion of subjects in different groups who experience an outcome by comparing the expected frequencies with the observed frequencies. If the calculated chi-square value is greater than the critical value, the null hypothesis is rejected. Here is the cross-tabulation table where you can see the number of 30-day readmissions within the hospital at each level of discharge, education, and support. After the chi-square was run in SPSS, you can see the chi-square value was 28.273. The critical value for this data was 13.815 with a p-value less than 0.001. Which is lower than the calculated chi-square value, indicating that the null hypothesis is rejected and the alternative hypothesis is accepted. From the cross-tabulation table, you can see that there is a high number of 30-day readmissions to the hospital with less discharge, education, and support. With usual care, there was a 64.5% readmission rate. With usual care plus a daily phone call, there was a 40.6% readmission rate. And with usual care plus a daily phone call plus a 24-hour online chat, there was only an 18.8% readmission rate. These results are displayed here in a bar graph, where the x-axis is the type of discharge, education, and support received, and the y-axis is the number of 30-day readmissions to the hospital. The blue represents no 30-day readmissions, and the green represents a positive 30-day readmission. As you can see here, as the level of support rises, the number of readmissions decreases. The second question was, is there a difference in the mean scores of the self-efficacy of persons with heart failure by levels of depression as measured by the BDI? The independent variable is the BDI score, which has 4 categorical levels that correlate with the severity of the person's depression. Minimum severity of depression is a score from 0 to 13. The mild score of depression is 14 to 19. Moderate is 20 to 28, and a severe score is from 29 to 68. The dependent variable is self-efficacy, which is scale data. The two hypotheses are stated here. The null hypothesis states that there is no difference in the mean scores of the self-efficacy of persons with heart failure by levels of depression as measured by the BDI. And the non-directional alternative hypothesis states that there is a difference in the mean score of the self-efficacy of persons with heart failure by levels of depression as measured by the BDI. The inferential test I used was a one-way ANOVA. The data meets the assumptions, which includes an independent variable with 3 or more groups, requires the dependent variable to be scale and normally distributed, and there must be a large sample size, which again, this data set includes a 200-person sample size. The one-way ANOVA determines if there is a difference between any of the groups. If the ANOVA is significant with a p-value less than 0.05, a post hoc test will be performed to identify the differences between groups. For this test, the numerator degrees of freedom was 3, and the denominator degrees of freedom was 196. For the denominator, I rounded up to 200 and found that at an alpha of 0.05, the critical value was 8.54. Here is the descriptives table. As you can see, the mean self-efficacy score is listed for each level in the BDI. The results of the one-way ANOVA is on the left. The mean square of the between group and the within group are listed on the table, and that resulted in an F value of 9.822. Which is higher than the critical value. On the post hoc test on the right, you can see a statistically significant difference between many of the groups as indicated by an asterisk, as well as a p-value of less than 0.05. So as I just stated, the one-way ANOVA did note a statistically significant difference between the groups. Therefore, I will reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis that there is at least one difference between groups. The post hoc test revealed a statistically significant difference in the self-efficacy scores between most of the 4 levels of depression on the BDI. While there was no difference between the minimum and mild groups, there was a significant difference between all of the other groups, as indicated by a p-value less than 0.05, which are listed here on the slide. In conclusion, we know that millions of Americans suffer from heart failure each year. There are high 30-day readmission rates that may be lowered with ongoing support and education for patients post-discharge. Decreased readmission rates may increase feelings of self-efficacy in heart failure patients. And as data suggest, lower feelings of self-efficacy leads to increased levels of depression. To improve the well-being of our heart failure patients, we must focus on education as well as support post-discharge in order to decrease readmission and improve self-efficacy.